Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Truth to Power Talk with your sister, Dr. Maat. Thank you for joining another powerful discussion. And tonight I have with me another powerful guest. But before I bring my guest on tonight, I want to acknowledge the Muhammad family. You're looking at a picture of Brother Ramsey Muhammad, his wife, who is now an ancestor, Paula Muhammad, and their two children, Ramsey Muhammad and Alea Muhammad. And today, the Baltimore community, we came out and we celebrated her life. And in fact, I'm actually just leaving there. And you all have heard Paula and Ramsey, believe it or not, each time that you have tuned in to the Truth to Power Talks with Dr. Maat, this husband and wife team created the intro. But because my intro is only 30 seconds long, you only hear the husband's, 30 seconds of the husband's verse. But tonight, in honor of Paula Muhammad, I'm going to play the entire song called Truth to Power. And we were actually getting ready we wanted to make the video for it back in like October and November, but she wasn't feeling well at that time. And so we didn't record it. Okay. But I just want to, for about 3 or 4 minutes, bear with me. I'm going to play the entire Truth to Power talk. All right, which is the intro to my show in honor of our beloved, our dear sister, Paula Muhammad. Take a moment, our family, share the show. Let people know that I'm live.
I hear the ancestors' voice traveling the wind. They told me focus, cause the real battle is within. Dismantle the sin, cause in the end we gon' win. We born blessed, the terrafilm and feral skin. That's never when they try to keep us where the hell at. On heroin, where they bust guns and sell crack. Get Ritalin to the kids, keeping us held back. Let's combat and fight back with no tracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop. Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth, and we tuned in to Dr. Maya. You can't fool me with the propaganda. The devil used to bruise me with his sloppy slander. Can't confuse me now, we got the answers. Masked up, red, black, green, bandanas. Yo, it's just the path that we chose. Black rebellious soul is more.
I see you all coming in. Share the show.
It's the Truth to Power talk.
Rest in power, Paula.
Vision is clear now, truth to the eye. Babylon show their head, exposing the lie. People kill where they at.
There's no black and black crime, but they use the media.
Try to poison the mind.
Put the woke back to sleep.
The deaf, dumb, and blind. Reparations now, separation now. Every time we rise, they make laws to keep us down. How many children have to die, huh? To see they don't want us around, They left the baby inside our blood, future buried in the ground. Still we rise. We burst through the flames of the fire. Warrior spirit, make the devil retire. Elijah Farrakhan, they expose all the liars. Time to come together, build our own empire.
Rest in peace, Paula Muhammad. Rest in power. We love you, sister.
The devil used to bruise me with a sloppy slander. Can't confuse me now, we got the answers. Masked up.
Red, black, green bandanas. I see Murderland Radio is in the building. New Black World Order. The Brothers UK is in the building. Peace and love, brothers. I see you, Michael Guest, in the building. Peace to Sister Lady K. Mosley. I see you in the building. Brother Sean P. I see you, brother.
Red, black, green, bandanas. Yo, it's just the path that we chose. Black rebellious soul is more than my clothes. It's the Truth to Power talk. Front rhyme about time, final hour thoughts.
Queen Mother Althea, I see you in the building, Queen Mother. Peace and love to you. Matama Robeson, peace, 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 King. Rest in paradise, Paula Muhammad, sending nothing but love and peace to her family and all of those who are connected to her. All of those who are connected to her. So, family, family, family. I have a special guest in the building. Dr. Lisa Green. Dr. Lisa Green, how are you doing tonight, Doctor?
I am doing just fine. Fine. Great to be here.
Great to have you on the show. I'm super excited to have this discussion with you. It was a brother by the name of Jeremiah Africa. He's going to be in the building tonight. Mm-hmm. He brought your work to my attention. He slid in my inbox on Facebook and he said, Dr. Maat, he said, there is a powerful sister. Her name is Dr. Lisa Green. She published, a textbook on African American English. He said in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And he said, you need to have her on your show. And so I said, okay, I'll check it out. So I went on to Amazon and I saw your textbook and some of your other published work. And I also did a Google search and saw that you're teaching over there at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Mm-hmm. And so then I said, I have to reach out to her and bring her on the platform. So thank you so much, Dr. Green, for being with us tonight. Family, take a moment out to share this show. Please share the show. Also, thumb up the video. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Okay, hit the notification bell so that as soon as I go live, you will be notified. Also, family, if you have not watched any of the Truth to Power Talks, or you need to get caught up, I created a Truth to Power Talk playlist on my platform. So be sure to check out the discussions in the archives. Tonight, I have Dr. Lisa Green with me. Prior to tonight, I had Dr. Richard Carrier. I've had Dr. Oh my goodness, so many. Dr. William Darity. I've had Professor James Small, Dr. Kamene, Dr. Malife Asante. I'm trying to think who else. Dr. Malife Asante. I also had, goodness, guys, I'm drawing a blank right now, but you can go right back to the archives and check out those discussions. Also, family, join me back here each Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Read Book Club. Right now, family, we're reading Birth of a White Nation by Dr. Jacqueline Badalore. Tomorrow, we will be discussing chapter 4. So be sure to join me back here. All right. So Dr. Green, I'm going to go ahead and read your bio. Dr. Lisa Green, distinguished university professor. Lisa Green holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. She returned to UMass after 11 years in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Texas at Austin. Green is the founding director of the Center for the Study of African American Language at UMass Amherst. Its goal is to foster and integrate research on language in the African American community and applications that research in educational, social, and cultural realms. The center will serve as a resource for communities across the country with a commitment to furnishing information and training to educators who address language and dialect-related issues. In the fall of 2009, Green was an Old Dominion Fellow in Linguistics at Princeton University. Green's research investigates variation within and across varieties of English with a focus on African American English. And moving away from the traditional approach of studying isolated features of AAE, that's African American English, that differ maximally from constructions in the standard and mainstream varieties of English, she considers systems in the AAE grammar, such as systems of intense aspect marking and negation. Green's work also explores the link between discourse and structural positions of elements in the left periphery. Her work on child AAE addresses questions about optionality and variation in language development. In her undergraduate teaching and workshops on dialects, Green considers ways of integrating linguistic description and practical application and conveying such strategies to diverse audiences. Her research areas are syntax, synthetic variation, African American English syntax and semantics, acquisition, and language development. She has published a few books and several papers. Okay, guys. And the text that I'm talking about is the African American, well, the text that I mentioned earlier is the African American English, a linguistic introduction that was published by Cambridge University in 2002. But she also has a book on the language and the African American child, which was published in 2011. All right. And another text entitled African American English Through the Years, Getting at the Core of Grammar. And she has several papers here, family, but you can do a quick Google search and check out her work. And so again, Dr. Green, I welcome you to the show. And I do appreciate your presence. So let's jump right on into it, Doctor. The topic tonight is, why do we speak the way we speak?
Mhm.
I remember, Doc, growing up and recognizing that we speak differently. When I would go around, European folks who spoke standard American English, even though, we're taught standard American English, we still speak, it's still a difference in the way that we speak standard American English, even if you want to call it that, or I guess maybe you might call it a dialect of standard American English. And so I remember in the 90s, you had language scholars and researchers who wanted to classify the way we speak as Ebonics. Now, I do know that Ebonics was a term that was coined by, I think, a sociologist back in 1973. So that wasn't a new term, but the term became popular in the 90s because there was a huge controversy around, classifying African American English as Ebonics. So you had some people who were the language scholars and researchers saying, well, it's a need to classify it as something else because it's not standard English. It is something else. It's a distinct dialect. And so we want to call it Ebonics. But then you had Black folks who were, appalled. They were offended. They said, wait a minute, are you trying to say that we can't speak standard English? And so, you had this whole debate going back and forth. In your opinion, Dr. Green, do you think that we should have been offended, or do you think that we should have acknowledged that we do speak differently? So what are your thoughts on that whole 90s controversy surrounding Ebonics, Doc?
Yeah, so that is pretty much, what you find in discussions of, I'm going to refer to it as African American English. It's really very difficult just to talk about it as a linguistic system. It's just sociopolitically charged, I might say. So I think, though, the goal during that discussion in using Ebonics was so ebony, black, phonic sounds, was to really make a distinction between a linguistic variety that, is argued to be linked to maybe some West African languages, to make that distinction between that and an English-based variety. So in the Ebonics sort of controversy, I think one of the goals was to really understand that, when you hear speakers of African American English, you probably hear something that's really very close to English. But if you look at the underlying structure, you'll find that some of those underlying structures are actually really different from what you find in English varieties. So that Ebonics was, on the one hand, a kind of move away from English. And it was also an effort to really begin to say, this is a distinct system, so let's call it something else. So some people may have been offended, I think I can understand that. So when I teach my introductory course, Introduction to the Study of African American English, I go in and I say, call it whatever you like. Let's just call it variety X. But no matter what you call it, you're going to find that it is indeed systematic. So I grew up as a native speaker of African American English, and I think I can really handle standard American English. And I think many native speakers of African American English actually can. But, depending on your linguistic community, then you're going to acquire the speech patterns in that particular community. So if you're growing up in a French speaking community, you will acquire that. If, like me, you're growing up in Southwest Louisiana, where there's influence from Cajun, Creole influence from speakers of African American English. If you're in a community, though, that a segregated community, it's quite likely that you will develop as your native variety African American English. And you may or may not also acquire completely standard American English, but that will depend on a number of factors. But if you know African American English, and if that's the only variety you still know a systematic variety. So when I talk about it, my goal is never to change people's attitudes. If it sounds ignorant to people, that's kind of, what you're trained to hear. But what no one can argue with me about the nature of its being systematic, rule governed system. And so when I look at children who are developing the variety at 3, 4, 5, because when we talk about African American English, most people assume that, you wake up one day at 15 years old and you start talking cool. But if you grow up in an African American English speaking community, when you acquire language at the very early stages of acquisition, you're going to be acquiring that system. So when I look at children who are developing the variety, then I see that they're doing the same kinds of things that children in other speaking communities are doing. Other mainstream American English speaking communities, French speaking communities, Spanish speaking communities. The children are developing a system, though. So they're developing systematically. So, our attitudes might lead us to be offended when we hear that this particular system is being named and, acknowledged. That's attitude. So that I don't deal with attitude. But I do look at linguistic description, and everything I know says that African American English is a linguistic system. So there's no, you wouldn't be offended if you take that route.
So you said, and that's you okay. So you said African American English is its own linguistic system. So Doc, how would you define, because we say AAE, African American English. Can you just define it and then explain to me, why do you say that it's its own? How did you come to the conclusion that it is its own distinct language system?
Okay, so when you know a language, you know quite a bit. You know so much about the language, you can't even explain what you know about the language. But what I can tell you is that when we think in terms of a linguistic system, we think in terms of a system of sounds. So the way you put sounds together to form words, to form syllables, to form words. Then there's another segment that refers to just sort of meaningful units. So maybe not full words, maybe full words. So, if you want to mark past tense, there's something that you have to do. Maybe for some verbs, it's adding ED. So that's another part of the system. There's also the syntax. So that's how we put phrases together to form sentences. And then there's semantics, meaning, pragmatics. Okay. So African American English has a system in each one of those. And so what people like to do is compare to mainstream English, and that's fine because we know mainstream English. But what we find when we look at each of those pieces of the system, we find that there's significant overlap, but there are also differences. Okay. And so that's what I mean by talking about systematic patterns. So I can give you an example. I'll give you common examples from the sound system. Okay. So in African American English, so let me first just do a teeny sound, just a sort of teeny sound lecture. So when we produce sounds, consonant sounds, for example, we can describe those consonant sounds in a number of ways. One way we have to make the distinction is, where in the mouth the sound is produced. We have to think about also what happens to the vocal cords when the sound is produced. And we also have to think about what's happening with the flow of the air when the sound is produced. So when speakers of African American English, maybe let's take the name Ruth. It may be pronounced as roof. Let's take birthday. It may be pronounced as birthday. Okay? But let's take bath. Bath may be pronounced as bath. But what about bathe? How would bathe be pronounced? Bathe might be pronounced as bathe. Okay? Smooth as smooth. Okay? All right? So now bathe, B-A-T-H-E, and bath, B-A-T-H, they both end in TH sounds, bath, bathe. But those are two different TH sounds. The first one, bath, is what we call a voiceless TH. The second one, bathe, is a voiced one. So speakers of African American English then actually have a system such that those TH sounds are actually distinguished. So a speaker of African American English might say bath.
I say
But
bath.
the speaker might also say bathe. So you can see bath becomes a f sound, but bathe becomes a v, bathe sound. But those in mainstream English both end in TH sounds. Those TH sounds are different. And in African American English, when those sounds are pronounced, one has an F sound, bath. The other one has a V sound, bathe. So that's a distinction, and it's a systematic distinction. So instead of saying birthday, speakers of African American English have the F sound, birthday. Okay. I can give you another. So that's a part of the sound system. So one more example, if you think of the TH sound at the beginning of the word, so let's say this. Some speakers of African American English might say this, okay? Then, okay? But let's say thank. I want to thank you. I'm thinking about it. There's no other way that a speaker of African American English would produce think or think. It's always sound, the TH sound. And so for speakers who might say, well, they're lazy, they don't want to take the time, they can't produce the TH in birthday, so they say birthday, we just point to the TH when it occurs at the beginning of the word, when African American English speakers always produce that TH sound. So when we say it's its own separate linguistic system, what we're saying is that there are certain rules that are followed by speakers of African American English, and they're systematic. I can make predictions about how speakers are going to produce certain sounds because these are not haphazard. It's not an accident that people say bath, birthday, smooth. That's not an accident. That's quite predictable. It's rule governed. So that's what we mean by saying a system. And we can say the same thing with the syntax and morphological sorts of pieces. So for example, I'll give you another example. So we have this auxiliary or copula B. So here's where it occurs in a sentence. He is nice. No problem with he nice. Can totally drop that verb form, he nice. Oh, he is talking. I said he talking. No problem taking that out. But what speakers of African American English will never do is drop that particular form when we are talking about first person singular. So while I can say I'm talking, I'm nice, speakers of African American English would never say I nice, I talking.
No.
You don't want to hear that after you're 4 years old. Okay, 3 years, that's fine. 4 years, it becomes ungrammatical in African American English. But speakers can say he nice, she nice. Oh, she too tall, but not I too tall. So again, it's very systematic. So when you get appropriation of African American English, it's quite easy to figure out where the appropriation is, because while you might think you know when an African American English speaker says, "Ooh, I'd be too tired," while you think you understand what that means, If you think it means I'm tired right now, that's not what it means. It means, I'm generally tired. So we can identify appropriation because, as a mainstream American English speaker, you might hear my African American English is an attempt to use mainstream English. So you might think it's, well, a bad attempt. She's using bad grammar, but it's systematic. So if you try to mock my African American English or appropriate it, I can really show where you really don't understand it, because what you're going to do may not be appropriate, although you're appropriating it, because it's systematic, it's rule governed.
It's rule governed. So that's why you say it's its own language system. Dr. Green, would you agree that our language system is includes the sounds from languages that we spoke, our ancestors spoke? So, for example, during the Ma'afa, when we were kidnapped and we were brought over here, we came from different ethnic groups and we spoke, different languages. And so do you agree that this language system that we have, African American English, is a product of, the languages that we were speaking, that we spoke when we got here, in addition to our contact with the British, the French, the Dutch, the Swedes, and et cetera? So what would you say to that, Doc?
That's quite possible. We just don't have the data to do the research that's needed to make a conclusive statement about that. But there are some points I think that could be made. Some people think in terms of consonant cluster reduction. So, that's, for example, if you have two consonants at the end of a word in a syllable, what we find is that both of those may not be produced. Thus, speakers may say things like tests instead of tests. So the plural of that will become tesses. So one claim is that, well, that kind of cluster reduction, not producing both of the consonant sounds, may be due to some restrictions in some of these earlier languages. That's not clear. But I think a place where we really haven't looked, and we're beginning to look, is in the intonational patterns. And you mentioned it. I swear, Dr. Maat, you must be a linguist. At the beginning, you said we sound different, even if we speak mainstream American English. So there's something about the intonational patterns. So we're beginning to look there. So, for example, there's this stressed been that's used. And you don't have to really stress it, but speakers can hear the difference. So if I say, oh yeah, I've been sitting here, or I've been sitting here. So I've been sitting here means that I started sitting here a long time ago, and I'm necessarily still sitting here. But that particular marker has a kind of stress on it that indicates a long period. Now, long can be 15 minutes ago or 15 years ago. Okay. Oh, what about your sister? Oh, she been left. Well, look, maybe she left 30 minutes ago. Maybe that's a long time. Maybe she went away many, many years ago. But that stress on that marker indicates a long period. And we can find that particular marker being used in some of the Creoles. We can find that. And so that sort of helps us make a link to earlier languages. So I think the intonational patterns, and when I say that, I mean,
I was just getting ready to ask you, Doc, what's the intonational pattern?
So like stress on a particular word. Okay. So like the rhythm of the speech, we're just beginning to analyze that rhythm of speech. So, I think we heard this in the O.J. Simpson trial. There was a question about, well, did the person sound like an African American English? Did the person sound Black? So what does that really mean? Oh, she sounds Black. What exactly? It could mean a number of things. It could mean something about these intonational patterns, the rhythm. It can mean also that, again, maybe something like minstrelsy, there are certain tricks that you're performing just to, sort of mimic what you take to be Blackness, figurative Blackness, so to speak. It could mean that perhaps. But I think we want to be interested in those rhythmic patterns, intonational patterns that might help us make the link to some of the earlier languages.
Okay, and you're saying that that just hasn't been done yet.
We just are beginning to look at some of these intonational patterns.
Okay.
And we want to again sort of figure out what it is, what kinds of cues are people picking up on, what are the what's your perception of this? And when we look at it on these machines like spectrographs, what do these contours look like? Okay, can we link this to some of the earlier patterns in languages that African American English may be related to?
Oh, Doc, I mean, how long do you think you'll be? I hope that you publish a paper. If you're able to make those links to say, if you could connect those patterns, let's say to Yoruba or some of the other West African languages, because most of us were brought here from Western Central part of Africa. And so I think that would be amazing, Doc, if you all can make that connection, the way we speak to how, our ancestors spoke. I mean, I think that would be absolutely amazing. So please, Doc, I mean, keep me posted on that, and let me know if you're going to publish a paper on that. Now, a few years back, I read a book called The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child by Dr. Amos Wilson. And there's I don't know if it's a section or a chapter that talks about, child development in language. And he was saying that our children are very advanced, but I think he said around 4 or 5. So in elementary school ages, he said we began to start losing them. And he said, and that's when language is being introduced to the child. So what would you say about that? Well, standard English is being taught and used in the system. So, our children are reared in communities where we speak African American English. But when we send them to the public school system to be educated, and I know in Baltimore City, not even just in Baltimore City, in the US, they said 81% of the teachers are European women. And so they're not speaking African American English in the elementary, middle, and high schools. So how do you think that impacts the learning of our children? So they're learning African American English in our households and in our communities. But then when they go to school, they're interacting with an educator who's speaking standard American English and teaching standard American English. Do you think that has any bearing on our children's learning, Dr. Green?
I think it probably does. And this is a question that continues to come up. And in the book I'm writing, I'm really looking at how we asked this question in the 1960s at the advent of research on African American English, and how in 2021, we still haven't sufficiently addressed the question. And that is indeed problematic. So, there is now, I think, again, more research, psycholinguistic research that really might help us figure this out. So I have a colleague who's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who is doing psycholinguistic tests. That is, he's really looking at what's happening when children, third graders, are processing language. So he's able to look at the brain activity to see what's happening when children, for example, are processing word problems in third grade on some of the standardized tests. So this is what happens. So in African American English, what we actually find is that third person singular S, and that's just this form on the verb run. So he runs as opposed to they run. So in African American English, I think it's pretty clear that third person singular S is not part of the grammar. It is not part of the grammar. Now, when children go to school, they can begin to produce it. But if you grow up in an African American English speaking community, 9.5 times out of 10, that marker is going to be one that isn't consistently produced. So my colleague then really wanted to figure out, it's just a little marker. What exactly does it mean? If I say he run fast, how is that different from he runs fast? It turns out speakers of African American English don't need this S marker on it to indicate that the subject is singular. So My colleague, and this is Michael Terry, wanted to find out if this marker is not part of the African American English grammar, if when we are acquiring African American English, that is not something that's systematically acquired. When you're in third grade and are faced with it on a test of word problems, math word problems, what is the processing load? So he is making an argument that, looking at these children as they are having to encounter verbs with third person singular S, that presents a kind of processing load. So if you encounter this, then in some of the writings, then for Michael Terry, he suggests that something is happening with the processing. So he's looked at this with children who do fairly well in math. They didn't have a problem learning math, but what about that particular marker? Okay. If you're faced with that marker, is there some processing load? If you're reading, when you come up against that marker, do you have to stop and kind of figure out where the devil did this come from? Mm-hmm. And so if that presents a kind of processing load, then we really have to raise the question about what other roadblocks children may face. Another one is that, children already go to school speaking African American English, but there are not many people trained who could really assist children if they want to develop writing in African American English, develop the kinds of writing skills. I was an English major. I can teach English. I can teach you to write and have good grammar. But if I'm teaching a speaker of African American English to write using his or her own grammar, what are the rhetorical strategies? As a teacher, I understand mainstream English, but how do I connect with the speaker of African American English? So I worked in child development centers collecting data. So when these children growing up in African American English speaking communities are 3, 4, 5, they have language. Trust me when I tell you. And when you present to them experiments in their own variety, they are developing it normally. So they are developing their language, but you're right. When we see them in third grade, something has happened all of a sudden.
That's what Dr. Amos Wilson said.
That is right. So what now? It's not just language, but some of it is indeed language. So if you don't understand the system as a teacher, then all you can do, Dr. Maat, is say, this is bad grammar. You can't do this, So we have a nice example. The little boy, Johnny, he's called Johnny in the text. Geneva Smitherman talks about this, was learning to read and doing a very good job in the classroom, but he was reading out loud. And he talked about a cat that lived on a certain street. And the cat scratched out as opposed to stretched out. So every time the child got to an STR and pronounced it as SKR, the teacher intervened and said, street, stretch. Can you imagine what happens if you're reading perfectly, but you just encounter that particular pattern, which is not a disorder. We see it's not a disorder if everything else is developing normally in the child. That's a part of the pattern. But if a teacher corrects that every time, then I don't want to read anymore. I don't want to read anymore. And if I don't want to read anymore, then how can my reading develop? So those are some of the, issues that are certainly faced in the classroom.
Yeah. And Doc, and sometimes, I feel torn. Many of the people who are watching, they know that I teach over at Morgan State. And sometimes when I'm reading these technical papers, I understand what our children are saying. I get it. And when they're writing their objectives and their experimental results and their discussions, I get it. But then I have to sit down and say, but you can't, I understand. But when you get out here in industry, you can't write like this, and so I don't know, Doc. I feel very torn because
Yeah.
why not? I mean, why not? Right? Why
Mhm.
not? Language is a part of our identity. So
Mhm.
to alter someone's language is essentially altering their identity. So why should we have to force I say children, I mean, they're 18, 19, and 20, but I
Mhm.
still look at them as my children. But why should we tell them you can't write like this? You got to use universal English. You got to use standard English. No one's going to understand this. Your grammar is bad. You got like literally sitting down having this, but they're just expressing themselves. Like you said,
Mhm.
they're just using the English that they are accustomed to
Mhm.
speaking in their
Mhm.
families and communities. So with that being said, Dr. Green, I know that there's a push for equity in education right now. You have professors and teachers saying we want equity in education. We don't want to keep on learning this biased history, that you're teaching. We want equity. Do you think that teaching African American English should also be a part of the curriculum?
Yeah, I don't teach people to speak it, but I certainly have a course on African American English. It really should be a part of the curriculum so that people understand the system, the rules, because I understand being torn. But again, children who come from mainstream or standard English backgrounds take English. They have English classes. They learn to write. Their writing, I have papers now I'm grading. I comment on their writing. I'm able to give them feedback. And so I want to help them develop also. They already master mainstream English, but they are getting more and more feedback. So if a child comes speaking African American English, then he or she needs to get feedback also. It's not just because I'm a native speaker of African American English. What I write is right. It's just the way. We have to also be able to comment on that writing. So not everything goes in African American English. If we're gonna just say, "Oh, express yourself," like you, then
Right,
I would rather leave it out.
right.
People need to be trained in rhetorical strategies. If I'm writing an essay and my goal is to write it using the variety, I, as a teacher, need to be able to give feedback that will be universal in helping this child gain more writing skills. So if you are a speaker of African American English, that does not mean you're not going to get more writing skills, more speaking skills. Just because I'm a speaker of African American English, it doesn't mean I can't get more skills or I can't get feedback for growth. So that's when I have a problem when we're saying, look, these children come in with their own language, let it be. No, mainstream American English speaking children come in with their own language, but they are taught. Teach our children then, if your claim is that they're speakers of African American English, teach them also. Not everything goes.
That's right. I hear you. Thank you so much for that. I know we're winding down, Dr. Green, but I want to jump into your book. And this was the book that not doctor, brother Jeremiah Africa brought to my attention. African American English, a linguistic introduction. What can if we were to grab this book, and family, I want you to head on out and shoot to, Amazon, grab the book. If you have a website, Dr. Green, would you want them to grab it from your website or just go right to Amazon and grab it?
Oh, Amazon or
Amazon. Okay, so if
you're
we so
fine.
so we go to Amazon and we grab the book African American English: A Linguistic Introduction. What will we find in your book? What should we look forward to learning or
If you
taking away
really
from that book?
Yep, you can find exactly what it means to say that African American English is systematic, and you can find the rules. And if you want to know more about, wow, how is it different from mainstream English? How is it maybe more like African languages? You'll find that I talk about tense marking and aspect marking in there. And then if you're saying this linguistic stuff is putting me to sleep, then go on to the chapter on literature and media and understand then how appropriation is using this so-called Black language, how that is like minstrelsy, and how, you can look at literal minstrelsy, actual blacking up, or figurative minstrelsy when you appropriate African American English, and then you have this sort of figurative blacking up. So if, there's something about language, and then if you're saying, I want more practical application. There's a chapter on education also in the book.
Doc, I'm grabbing that. I had look my son for Mother's Day. Look at this, Doc.
Oh no!
He bought me a Amazon gift card.
Oh good.
And so I'm going to be spending my Amazon gift card on your textbook as soon as we get off the interview. Oh my goodness. And what about your book, Language and the African Child? What could we turn? What can we look forward to learning? From that. What would be the takeaways from that?
This is probably the first book and maybe the only one on the development of African American English in children. But what you will actually find in there is that children who are developing African American English go through the same kinds of stages. What had been done in looking at children developing African American English was sort of comparing children who are developing African American English to adults. Researchers had gone and said, oh, yeah, she's a 5-year-old speaker of African American English. She's doing what the adult is doing. But I step back and say, if children are developing that variety, here are some of the stages that we expect from children. Let me just say this thing too. I mean, when we look at language and African American children, this whole new concept that this is a new term, adultification comes to mind. That these children are seen as adults. But if we look at developing language, we see that they are developing language just like, their other counterparts in other communities.
Beautiful. And the African American English through the years, getting at the core of grammar. What can we expect to learn from that book?
So that book traces the discussion of African American English to the early 60s when segregation, integration, when now you have to sort of address these children who are coming from different communities. So we're looking at, unfortunately, how some of the same issues like the Ann Arbor ML Martin Luther King Jr. case came back around as the Ebonics case, and some of these issues now with respect to African American English and social justice. Think in terms of, witnesses in the Trayvon Martin trial, how African American English is viewed by certain speakers. So some of what we're seeing today is what we saw in the early 60s in African American English. And my question is, why can't we get out of the rut? So I'm going to try to really, really see if we can sort of move beyond this kind of never-ending circle.
And you mentioned during the interview that you're working on another book. Could you tell us a little bit? I don't want to give it away, Dr. Green.
So that's that's the Getting to the Roots book.
Oh, hold on, wait a minute.
That's the third one. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it says in preparation.
Yes,
I see it.
That's the one. Yes,
that is the one. And when can we expect for that to be available, Dr.
We really, really hope in 2022.
Okay, at the beginning of 2022. So, Doc, let me circle back because you mentioned that in your book, African American English: A Linguistic Introduction, that you did, identify some similarities between African American English. You said, I think you said West African language, right?
So in general, right. So again, we haven't done the research, but what we do know, so one of the ways that African American English really differs from general English is in the tense and aspect system. And so that's just a way of how we talk about events and times and the progression of events. So one clear example is again this marker B. So it's something like, I be walking too fast. I can say that now, which means I generally walk too fast. Another marker is kind of perfect marker. Have you eaten? Oh yeah, I done ate. So the done marker. Another one is been. Okay, she been left. Those are markers that really say something about the makeup of an event, okay? Whether we're looking at the event in a habitual kind of way, I'd be walking too fast generally, whether or not it's an event that sort of is finished, like the item 8. And so those are markers that come before the verb. So those markers then don't just mark tense or time, they mark other sorts of properties of event. And so we in African American English, these markers are grammaticalized, meaning that they are full words. And that's a way it differs from mainstream English. But if we go to, again, some of the African Creoles languages, we find then that we get these kinds of pre-verbal markers. And so we refer to that as the tense aspect system of African American English. And so that's a real way that we find some similarities.
Okay. All right. But you were saying earlier that you don't have the evidence for, okay, because I was kind of confused. I was like, okay, she said she mentioned in her book, but earlier she said she didn't have the evidence. And so I was trying to.
Yeah, so we don't have, so we can say, for instance, that in general, those overall languages, if we think of West African languages, Creoles, there's also a kind of tense aspect system. And we see that in African American English. So it's not we don't have a good way of saying, okay, this particular marker can be traced back to that particular language or that particular marker in that particular language.
It's just overall. It's kind of overall
there are
collectively.
Some similarities. Yes.
All right. So thank you so much. So Dr. Green, do you have any closing words for the listening audience, Dr. Green?
Well, I just want to thank you and thank you for the work you do. And I have to tell you, Dr. Maat, you're going to have to allow me to listen to that, in over and over, this Truth to Power talk. That song, I just need to hear the words. It's wonderful. So I just need to hear that. But thank you for having me. And thank you for talking about language. I really, really appreciate that.
At Doc, I'm telling you, it's a few linguists were in the building. They specialize in studying the Medunetter and reconstructing the Medunetter. So they came in here to support you, and they were curious about the what you were going to say, and so I'm Doc. I'm just happy that you came on the show. You're a very, very busy woman. You and I were joking about that backstage before we went live. And I was saying that I went to the funeral today and my mother said, well, do you want to reschedule? I said, Ma, I can't reschedule because Dr. Green, Dr. Green is on the go. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Green, just for the work that you're doing. I'm grabbing, like I said, after this show, I'm going to Amazon. You'll see an order come through from me to grab your book. And hopefully, Doc, I would love for you to come back on. I do have a book club. I would love to read your book and maybe you come on and have a few discussions with us, about your work. And please keep us posted, Doc, on your upcoming book. I would love to bring you back to even talk about, your upcoming book.
Thank you.
So family, we got to drop a bomb. We had to drop a bomb for Dr. Green. Doc, I will be in touch with you, Doc.
Thank you.
So thank you again for coming on the show. And you might want to stay backstage and check out the outro. The outro, and family, normally my outro, I play the Truth to Power talk as an intro and outro. But for the outro, I'm going to play Justice or Else by brother Ramsey Muhammad and Paula Muhammad, the sister that we laid to rest today. So Doc, sit backstage. All right. I want you to sit backstage and check it out.
Thank you.
All right, family. Yeah, normally I would play my outro, but I do want to honor Sister Paula Muhammad again. Again, we laid her to rest today. And I would like to honor again by playing this video, Justice or Else. My sons and I, we were actually in the video. I remember we shot it in front of the Freddie Gray Memorial down here in Baltimore City. And so I see all you look, people saying, thank you, Dr. Green. I'm going to show her your comments. They said, thanks, Dr. Green. They said, another powerful discussion. People said, peace, Doc. They said, thank you. Yeah, they loved you. They loved you tonight, Dr. Green. They loved you tonight. I see you, Mr. Michael Guest. They said, Asante Sana, Dr. Maat and Dr. Green for another great show. Thank you, family. Thank you. So for the outro, instead of me playing my Truth to Power talk, I'm going to play a video that I was in the video with my sons and I in the video with Paula Muhammad and Ramsey Muhammad, and we shot it in front of the Freddie Gray Memorial in Baltimore City. So that's going to be my outro, family. Join me back here, same time, same place. I love you all. Peace and Black Power.